More to Marketing. Welcome to More to Marketing, the podcast that explores marketing, product, and business. I'm your host, Susan, and today we're going to be talking about how marketing is turning from creative arts and needing to be more of a mad scientist approach if you really truly want to have success. So today my guest is Terry, and he is a seasoned marketing professional with over 25 years of experience transitioning from that traditional commercial artistic type of role into what he calls the mad scientist of marketing. And we're going to explore that more because I'm really excited about his take on this and how it actually does work. Now, throughout his career, Terry has actually led a whole pile of initiatives with really well-known brands and names that you've heard of. And just a few of his huge list. And do check him out on LinkedIn if you want to see the full list. It is huge, but some of the big names that I could easily recognize: Visa, NFL, FIFA, Olympics, HBO, and many, many, many more. He advocates for a formalized, evidence-based approach to creative effectiveness, blending scientific rigor with creativity to drive those measurable results and outcomes that businesses truly need. Now, Terry's journey mirrors the evolving marketing landscape, where you've got data, testing, and AI, and they're reshaping how marketers operate and also communicate value, especially to those C-suites. Deeply engaged in conversations around how marketers can shift from chasing attention to finding the true intersection between consumer needs and unique brand delivery. He stands as a thought leader at the forefront of marketing's future. Welcome, Terry.
Susan, thank you for the intro. We're done. You said everything I wanted to say. So. Amazing job. No, thank you. That's a wonderful intro.
Thank you so much. You make it easy, but tell us more about you, your journey, how you came about thinking of things a little bit differently as well to get these great results.
Yeah, I'm actually going to start based on the conversation we were having before we hit the record button, which is that so many people forget where they started from, and I think you called it sort of the baby steps that ultimately got them to where they are now. And that is a direct parallel to this pivot of my career from 25 years ago, starting as a quote unquote commercial artist to one that is what I believe is our calling as a mad scientist. Back then, I'm going to sound like that person. I started in advertising at a couple of agencies in New York City, and the agency world was populated with artists. They were musicians and writers and satirists and animators, producers, actors. And they were this wonderfully eclectic mix of artists who needed to pay the rent to do the other stuff. It was almost sort of like the inverse of a side hustle. And advertising, the creation of ads, was that creative endeavor that scratched their respective itches, but did so to sort of pay the rent and seemingly move business along. I'm not the first person to say this. Like, the industry, the tectonic plates underneath our industry have changed such that the notion of, well, we're just going to create these beautiful ads that had some loose process to it, briefs and creative development work. There was very little testing done back then, or it took forever. There was zero optimization, and measurement was a lagging indicator of performance if measurement was done at all, right? It was almost like this free form artistic collective that created ads, right? That was the notion of a commercial artist. That's completely different to how you and I and the rest of the world operate these days. And that's because the advent and the ubiquity of data, measurement, attribution models, et cetera, have wonderfully forced us into codifying what was a haphazard approach. And that will continue with the promise and peril and advent of AI, right? The AI is an accelerant of that. But what we've done over the last 20, 25 years is just gotten more formal in that approach. And for me, That's been a really refreshing reframe of my career to move from creativity for creativity's sake to uh, this notion of a scientist, which, yes, it includes rigor, but it also includes a healthy dollop of alchemy, which in and of itself is about curiosity and creativity. So I know we're going to talk about sort of in some respects, the definition of creativity, but it's present in sort of both worlds. It's just sort of been it's sort of refined and changed for me over the last 25 years. But yeah, when I grew up, um, there was just this wonderful mix of artists, and now we have sort of a formalized approach to do what they do, the magic that they bring.
Awesome. And I think just looking at some of the places you've been and clients you've worked on, you've really had an opportunity to go through this changing landscape and adopt a whole pile of different skills. So, how did you find going through those changes live during those moments in your career?
Um, I'm a human being. I think I excelled at some things and stubbed my toe and failed at others. I think what is interesting is um, it's it's important that we take some steps back and gain some perspective, which is really hard to pivot one's um, anchoring points on the business and how it changes, e.g., from a less measurable John Wanamaker, 50% of your advertising is wasted. I'm just not sure like what 50% to going, oh wait, now everything has to be measured because it can be, doesn't mean it should be. And I think what's been really interesting and challenging is finding the truth in some of those things versus not, and um, taking one step out of the frying pan that we are in every day as practitioners and thinking sort of more holistically about the process and about the ecosystem that we're living in. I share a lot of the same concerns I think that the industry has in terms of have we over rotated um, into automation, into AI, into attribution modeling, because of the amount of data that we have at our disposal that we can use. I think I've fallen prey to, believing what the platforms are telling us in terms of attribution. And you just go, but there's so much common sense that we've abdicated that I think existed 20, 25 years ago that can't necessarily be quantified, but it could be qualified, and we shouldn't lose sort of sense of that. So for me, the arc of wanting to be graded and driving more bottom line business outcomes has been a blessing because of how smart we are getting, uh, the rigor and approach that we are now and have been adopting, um, because we all like to get graded at the end of the day for the homework and our sweat equity and the efforts, which was quite frankly a frustrating thing, I think, for a lot of folks way back when, and myself. We were just like, you did all this work and you're like, well, how'd it do? I don't know.
Mm.
Right? Like, we got paid. That's not the answer, right? You want to be judged on the merits of your work. So I think that transformation has been great. I think one of the interesting things is trying to disseminate fact from fiction, hype from reality, et cetera. And I think we're in this interesting age and space where the hyperbole around transformation and change, um, is has overtaken, I think, some common sense stuff. So, for example, um, if we're honest with ourselves, the human brain hasn't changed in 3,000 plus years. And I'm sort of paraphrasing and quoting the Evidenza guys, who have started this synthetic research company. They're brilliant guys, used to work at LinkedIn, et cetera. But they made this point that's like the human brain hasn't changed in 3,000 years. Why do we suddenly think that that attribution, how we make decisions, um, somehow has changed over the last 10 years just because we can measure a bunch of things, vanity and or otherwise? And you go, yeah, it makes sense, right? And it goes back to this notion of, I don't know if he's right, but again, common sense thinking. Simon Sinek, who I'm not sure if you're familiar with, right? He
Yes.
talks, yeah, right. He talks about people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
Mm,
And he references over and over again this notion that people make decisions, e.g., purchase decisions, through their subconscious,
mm.
through the limbic part of their brain. And then they post rationalize those decisions through the neocortex. Again, a lot of sort of bio and chemistry underpinnings around something very clear and simple. But it gets to this point that, like, we as human beings are irrational, we're illogical, we're non-binary in wonderfully beautiful, crazy ways. Um, but we've somehow convinced ourselves and the industry and our colleagues and people in our organizations that we suddenly have the answers and can either guarantee futures or predict futures with a certain amount of certainty that quite frankly
Mm.
is antithetical to human behavior and how we think and what we feel.
Yeah, it's interesting. I even had a conversation with someone very recently, and they're asking me, how would I prove certain things worked in marketing? And the example they wanted me to do was, how, if we put money into branding, what's our return on investment? And I turned around and said to them, I said, well, firstly, your marketing fund should probably be split into two here in this particular example. One is campaigns to actually get acquisition, 80% of your money, and then 20% towards branding, because that's a long tail impact and that will help you in the future. And she's like, okay, but I want to know how that 20%, where's my return on investment? I said, well, branding, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the hardest metrics unless you're in one of the Fortune 500s or really high in a certain industry. You're never going to truly know if you move up or down in needles, because it is future proofing for yourself, for your business. It's that organic
Mhm.
growth. It's helping you in that story of your business. So that is what you need to measure in a year, in 2 years, measure against those and the metrics that go along with that. But it's not something that you're going to get that blip spike. That's your campaigns. And she just looked at me and was like, oh. And I think there's so many businesses out there that don't realize that when you're looking at your marketing funds and how to do things, those metrics are different depending on the types of campaigns. And you need to recognize that as well, because going back to things you've been talking about, people buy into that notion, like you were saying with Simon, but that comes about by a brand that gets built over time and that trust that goes with it. A campaign might give you a little bit of an adrenaline hit and a bit of a spike there, but the long term is what you really want to grow there.
Yeah, I love what you just said, and agree unequivocally with it. Again, going back to sort of my journey in the start, like 20, 25 years ago, measurement measurement either didn't exist or the correlations between what you did and the actions you took and bottom line business outcomes absolutely didn't exist, or for the most
Mm.
part didn't exist outside of coupons and offers and like redemption type stuff. But again, with the advent of data and technology and social content platforms, et cetera, we've almost over rotated into trying to prove out deterministic outcomes. And that is
Everything.
that, yeah, and that's sort of a false promise. I love your point about thinking both in terms of short-term performance or demand gen,
Mm.
because that is about converting current cash flow opportunities. But that's a finite number of people. That's a finite percentage of your audience. And you need what people are calling brand or have historically called brand.
Mm.
You need that to expand one's market, expand the upper part of the funnel, such that you're driving people. And I know funnel's a controversial concept or dirty word, et cetera, but moving people from not disposed to disposed such that they can be converted in the short term. messaging different, content different, etc. So it's, to your very good point, it's an and, it's not an or. I think about brand as long-term acquisition
Mm.
versus short-term acquisition, future-proofing or creating future cash flows and then converting current or near-in cash flows. And if you think about that reframe, Susan, which you rightly sort of painted, that gives you a much more expansive strategy to then go to finance with, or C-suite, or fill in your PE, your VC firms, to go, this is why we do marketing. It isn't pixels and teddy bears and lovely sort of emotive things only, or it's not just here's this dry product benefit. It all works sort of in concert. I go back to, and by the way, this is a corollary to um, the notion of finance and investment, and how we secure the monies that we need to drive bottom line business outcomes. Um, we we seem to have uh, over rotated into that, and we talked about it before, need to prove out our value through deterministic outcomes. No other function in an organization
Mm.
has to do that. We just have spent the last 50 years telling a very poor story to others in organizations to go, what's the value of what we do? We've never been able to explain it, or they don't believe us.
Mm.
But if you think about finance for a second, when they contemplate making an investment in something, there are no guarantees. They build in risk variables and inputs and criteria because they are conscious to go, I can't, with 100% certainty, 100% of the time, guarantee a future outcome. There's risk involved in these things, right? If you think about, I'm going to like nerd out with the CAPM or the APT or the discounted cash flow. And there's all of these models to go, if I invest in the future X, I expect a return of Y. Part of that return is based on risk, which is an acknowledgement that you cannot guarantee the future. So why should we in marketing be held to that same standard? That's crazy. But in the world where we've, in many respects, are not trusted with the measurement and the tethering or the correlations between what we do and the bottom line business outcomes, there's no belief or confidence. And so we get sad at the kids' table at Thanksgiving with respect to investment and opportunities. And we need to like course correct that, or
Mm.
we will forever not be trusted and see investment or the underinvestment continue to dog us in many respects.
Mm. I think this is a good segue into one of our questions, which is,
Yeah.
what does the mad scientist mindset look like, and why is it so important for marketers to start practicing? And particularly why it's so different to the old way that you've just described, where we have to prove everything. So tell us about your mad scientist mindset, please.
Well, again, it goes back to the beginning of like, here we were, an eclectic mix of people, of artists who came together to create these ads, but the process was a little bit wobbly and not refined. And then on the back end, the measurement didn't exist, or didn't largely exist. Um, that can no longer be the case with how marketing functions are run. They are often uh, run on ROI and the expectations, again, based on data, that there be a more formalized approach, right? Everything that we've seen over the last 25 years sort of leads us to that in whatever function you're in. In marketing is in many ways no different, except for the fact that the human condition and the human behavior is non-binary, illogical, and irrational, right? So that's the art,
Mm-hmm.
the art and the science. The scientific approach is just a codification of is the codification of the steps to get to a more probabilistic set of outcomes that will drive bottom line business, right? So it's being more confident, more educated in the choices and actions and levers that you pull and make to drive an aligned outcome. So if you think about the scientific process, first and foremost, it's about developing a hypothesis or hypotheses, right? Then you test and you validate those things.
Mm-hmm.
You analyze the results. You communicate out the findings. Are you affirming or debunking those hypotheses? Are there pivots to be made? And then you go make them, or you wash, rinse, and repeat the scientific process until you get to a more highly probabilistic outcome of your activities. It sounds simple. Um, it's not revolutionary. It's just codifying the things that we have been sort of moving towards over the last 2 decades. Where I think creativity plays a really wonderful part is one is in creating those hypotheses. Um, Two is in the analysis of those findings, and the debunking or affirmation of those hypotheses. And three is in the course correction. But four is if we think about science, science is about curiosity and creativity is about curiosity.
Mm.
So there is this sort of like shared mind space, and ambition of curiosity to answer the questions of marketing and science, which I believe are the search for truth, which sounds very Star Trek. And I know we were talking a little bit before the record about some of this. But science is about the search for truth, right? That goes back to the hypothesis. Marketing is the same thing, albeit from a slightly different place. Now, what is that place? And this is why I call it, there's many sort of iterations or definitions into the idea of a mad scientist. But our search for truth is about creating lasting, meaningful associations and memories in our target audiences to ultimately drive a perception or a behavioral change. Brands are basically shorthand for those memories and associations. That's the truth. And when we do it well, when those associations and memories that we create are recalled in the minds of our customers or consumers, that's where the concentric circles fit. And we are delivering on their unmet needs. We're amplifying an opportunity. We're solving a problem for that. And they can readily recall the brand or association such that we're top of mind and we make it easier for them to sort of choose us and purchase us accordingly. And the interesting thing is, and this is where it gets really fun, right? The truth is very much in the eye of the beholder, right? And so if a consumer or a customer is predisposed to buying you or using you again because of the actions that they're taking, but they are the ones, not in some lab, that determine what the truth is. And the mad part of this is that you and I and everyone in the industry are like, this sounds like a really good job to pursue. Like the craziness of trying to create a memory and an association in the mind of an illogical or rational binary customer or consumer is mad. But who better to understand somebody that isn't linear than other people who aren't?
Mm.
So that's like the fascinating journey for I think us over the last couple of decades.
And the piece I love about the mad scientist mindset for marketers is consumers are so different, so unique. And if you keep treating them as mass, you're going to lose. So by thinking about all the different variables, all the different possibilities, all of these different things, of course, it's going to be like having a giant cauldron and all these beakers and other glass contraptions going all at once to try and find which ones can work in which situations and which ones don't.
Unequivocally. And I think, again, that's where the alchemy comes in of it's about experimentation. Um, I pause to talk about personalization because I think that we better understand our consumers and our customers more so than ever. But personalization is this catchphrase for still sort of scaled targeting and messaging. And Susan, you beat to a different drum than I do, than your husband does, than my wife does, and everybody in our community. And so, like, can you ever achieve personalization um, to that specificity? I'm not sure, and that's a question I also have um, for AI. What is interesting, and it sparked what you just said sparked something um, that I came across a couple days ago from Lee Clow, the legendary ad guy
Mhm.
from Chiat Day, and his quote was, "Focus on being personally relevant, and being culturally relevant will take care of itself. The inverse is not guaranteed." And so
Mm.
it's this interesting notion that if you going back to this like the search for truth, relevance is about truth. If we can somehow crack that at a personal level, as much as we can, being relevant at scale in culturally will take care of itself. But if you start by trying to be culturally relevant, that may not be that may not work on on an individual level. And I just thought
Mm.
that that was like, again, common sense um, that could have been said 100 years ago through John Wanamaker, up through 20 years ago when I started in the business up to now. But we've gotten away from some of that.
Mm.
Um,
And I think that that's a really good way to start thinking about how AI is now starting to dominate a lot of marketers.
Yeah, and and for and for good reason. I talk about it in sort of two ways. There's sort of the promise and sort of the perils. I think the promise is everything that everyone's already highlighted in terms of faster go to market, research, content development, optimizations, um, uh, you know, testing, the automating of processes that are laborious and time consuming and super costly. Like,
Mm.
yes, yes, yes. Check, 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 check. I think I think the perils are, one, going back to the search for truth. Inherent
Mm.
in truth is trust. And um, I worry about the public's ability to uh, trust what is being delivered, um, and on its sort of face value, or are we just sort of handing over all of our beliefs um, uh, and decisions sort of accordingly, right? So that's the always, you know, you got to you got to really verify what AI is telling you, verify it again, and it's only as good as the inputs that you put in, by the way. Two is, I think, one of the perils, which should get better with time, is going back to this notion of like, it is a number of LM of learning models that are based on the inputs that you provide. And so it seems to be a race, as Greg Hahn would say, for mischief. It seems to be a race to the middle, a race to the
Mm.
mean, or a race to the average, where you're not going to see differentiation because the inputs are going to largely be the same. And can a model really uh, really be able to predict and or understand the human condition and the human mind and the human heart? That's where I go. There's this big question mark. Again, we're super early days that have yet to be answered. And so what, right, the industry is trying to anchor itself on in some parts to sort of save itself is, well, the emotion inherent in a human being can never be modeled to the degree that we can, as humans, also create and are better able to connect to. I I don't know. It's a huge question mark. But yes, it is a transformational um, set of levers that are going to and are and have and will continue to automate a lot of the processes that have built our ecosystem, over the last number of decades.
Mm. I think for some marketers who are more focused on promising that deterministic outcome, that's where there's some of those bigger changes and I suppose cautionary tales that should be done to ensure that they're not making promises. What, how would you help a marketer now talk about more of this problematic type of approach and thinking, which is the mad scientist approach, over the old school metrics of ROI? How would you help that marketer to do that shift internally to the C-suite?
Well, that is a great question. I think first and foremost, I think we have to, uh, where possible, come clean and go. We, hand on heart, acknowledge that um, our current way of measuring the effectiveness of marketing is insufficient, or largely insufficient. Um, Equal to that is the admission that we need to get out of the deterministic business because we cannot certifiably prove it, right? We are making promises that we can't meet. We are writing checks our bodies can't cash. I think level set, and then that gets into, okay, well, what's the solution? I think there needs to be and has been a great deal of work done on a new measurement set of frameworks that are about probability. And I go back to the three investment models that finance uses and go, we should be re-anchoring ourselves on things like the CAPM, the capital asset pricing, or the arbitrage pricing theory, or discounted cash flow, or some semblance of that, to go, let's model out what investment would look like in knowing and mitigating and acknowledging the risk associated with these things. Risk is about where our ability to deal with risk is correlated to probable outcomes, not guaranteed outcomes, deterministic outcomes. So we need a new framework. I was just having lunch with an old Visa friend of mine who ran our data science department, and I said, "Am I the only one thinking about this? Because I am going back to business school, like not adept and steeped in the finance and investment models that I was, 15 years ago. Are people using it?" And he said, well, it depends on the industry. He said, but yeah, like the CPG world looks at net present value of marketing investment and tracks it back. It goes to your point about ROI. At Visa, interestingly enough, we had a ton of money and a ton of resources to develop models and frameworks like this. ROI at some point was wonderfully believed and trusted. Unfortunately, it was a lagging indicator, and so you really couldn't optimize and act on it. But if you did something like an ROI model with the upfront investment modeling work, you would probably get to a better bridge of, we want to
Blending it.
invest this, yeah, and do that, and we will likely see X, Y, and Z outcomes on the back end. And by the way, we can optimize sort of accordingly. Much smarter people than me, but there's $1 million idea in here somewhere. I just haven't been able to crack it. But yes, coming clean, reframing the measurement frameworks. And then I got to be honest, it sounds so simple and pedantic, but I don't know if many organizations actually align with the C-suite, the CFO, et cetera, on these things before annual plan, or it happens in the middle of annual plan, or it happens after, like, this post-rationalization part. So before you engage in annual planning or multi-year planning, is everybody aligned to these KPIs and how we are going to measure them? Are they tied to the corporate strategy? And if not, then you need to blow them up really fast and make sure that there is alignment. Two is, I'll make two more points. Two is going back to the mad scientist approach. I think one of the challenges from a trust and belief perspective from the C-suite and the CFO is in the process itself, or the process that we used to have. Now that there's so much rigor and systematic approach to this, we need to bring them along, right? That is now talking their language. We don't need to bring them in every meeting, but making them exposed and aware to the process, I think will go a long way to instilling or reinstilling that belief. Um, um, and then three is, I think 50% of the mark of a great head of marketing, VP, SVP, CMO is in educating the C-suite and the finance department. And I keep quoting the finance department, by the way, because more and more they are in control of our dollars if we're being honest with ourselves, right? But educating them about all the things, Susan, you and I have just been talking about for the last 35 minutes, which I often think gets ignored either because we don't have confidence as marketers to explain those things, or those things aren't explainable because we haven't taken the time to sharpen our pencils and think as corporate strategists and true P&L profit and loss owners of the business. We should be spending a lot more time not walking them through campaigns and walking them through and educating them on the probabilistic nature and approach that we're now taking through a scientific process.
Yeah, it reminds me of an example I've given before where I've gone into C-suite to get a campaign approved. And I've used a scientific approach to it because I have past campaigns, I've showed them results. So I've gone through numbers. I've then showed them what the probability is going to be for the numbers we'll hit with this new campaign, which I had a very great track record of being very, very close to that number that I would put forward. And then they turned around and said, no, we're going to go with our gut. Now, they were not the target audience. They were not the people that were going to be buying this product. But no, I believe I would want a gift card. It's like, I've proved to you that that doesn't work. That was one of the examples. I'll go back to that slide. That won't work. They don't want that. They want this. And I got told, no, you're doing what I think in my gut. And they just completely ignored the scientific approach, showing actual numbers. I then predicted what the new number would be, and I was within 30.
Wow.
So I was actually within a tiny, tiny percentage of it. I was within 30 of them. And they're just like, I'm like, yep, we are 500 off our targets because you went with your gut and that wasn't what the consumers wanted. And I think that's something else that comes back to trust. Trust in the team that is giving you that rigor, that's doing that scientific approach to you. They've done all that work to help your decision be easier. But if you're going to completely throw it out and go with your gut and you're not even the target audience, you then need to put that in writing for the whole business to know that you are changing. And in this case, it meant no bonuses to team members because of that decision. That was a poor decision, not based on anything, but based on gut of someone who wasn't even that target audience. I did get told to get out and be quiet, but
But a friendly reminder, C-suite, you are not and will never be the target audience. So
very rarely.
But I will say, going back to the scientific process for a second, one of the benefits of adopting and following one or it is you need to check your bias at the door, at the first stage of that. And if you're able to do that, that will unlock the alchemy and the curiosity and the creativity because you're not maniacally, dogmatically focused in one space or the other. But certainly shame on that person. Hopefully they learned their lesson and in year two got out of the way and listened to you.
The thing with this one was I'm not even the target audience. So I was using only data. So no one could even say that it was me being biased or prejudiced. It wasn't, because I was just using all of the data around me, the insights I had, all the
Yeah.
research to then base it on what the prediction would be. And I had commercial in agreement with me. My commercial buddy, who helped me ensure my numbers were correct, we were 100% in sync. So it was, it's always an interesting one. I use that example a lot because trust is something you earn. I had earned that trust, but they still want to go with their gut anyway.
So that's such a wonderful case. Um,
It makes me
can
laugh
I tell
still.
you one? Can I tell you one from Visa?
I would love it. Share.
Okay. So roll back the clock again. It's 2017, it's 2018. Um, there was the Me Too movement, the Time's Up movement. There was that wonderful Fearless Girl execution at the New York Stock Exchange, right? With the, I know we're not on video, but right, that little girl, confronting the bull, the Wall Street bull. Um, and it was this cultural movement that was happening.
Mm.
And this actually goes back to the Lee Clow quote. Um, and it was like brands can't be sitting on the sidelines any longer. And I'm not going to get into this, like, is purpose, the Jim Stengel conversation. Like, I didn't necessarily want to go there, but it was like, that said, as a curious scientist, were we seeing, as a huge financial services brand like Visa, any expectation, any softening in either brand equity or share of wallet, share of spend with women, and particularly younger women in the US, um, at that time period, or over the course of what amounted to sort of the 8 quarters leading up to that? And what did we think moving forward would happen if we were not better aligned with our beliefs and actions with respect to them?
Mm.
So again, more context. Right, women's relationship to money has changed over the last number of decades. College degrees, like, all-time high, like, overtaken men. Purchasing power has always been there. Disposable income, but there were things like pay inequality that were, the light was being, incredibly shined on them. All stuff happening in Hollywood, etc. And my team and I looked at the data and we said, there is a gap in brand equity attributes with respect to relevance and differentiation, and even things like badge value with Visa, with respect to our competitors and what we should be benchmarked against relative to our market share. Are we then seeing that in share of spend and share of wallet? Well, yes, we are. And so the advertising agency and my team, the advertising agency is a company called Decoded, came up with this wonderful, or cracked this wonderful insight that was around money and conversation. So money is a topic or series of topics that have been comfortably talked about forever amongst men, but very taboo with women, despite all the economic, education, societal gains that they've made over the last, that had made over the last 50, 60, 100, 80, 100 years since suffrage. And it was like, well, why aren't they talking about this stuff? And can we, as Visa, which is a proxy for money, encourage them to start conversations about money such that conversations lead to knowledge, lead to sharing, lead to knowledge, lead to empowerment? And so we started this wonderful campaign where we would raise these questions about pay inequality, the pink tax, money relationship issues, friend, and roommate relationship issues, investment issues, or the lack of information. So we created
Super,
all these
all of
these
those.
topics. Yeah, we created all of these topics and created ads based on statistics and some polling that we had done to see which ones were resonating and more acute about sparking conversation. I'm giving you all of this backstory because we took the campaign and the thinking behind the campaign and we brought it to management. And they freaked out. and said, wait, we don't do gender-based campaigns. We are Visa. We are a rising tide lifts all boats. This is about, all for one, one for all. And we were like, well, yes, that as a business model, but there's clearly people in the boat that aren't rising with you and us. And we think that provoking conversations about sensitive money topics is the way to start that. And they were incredibly squeamish. And so what we had to do was literally test all of the different ads. Right? Think about testing the pink tax or think about pay inequality. And it made them very uncomfortable until you showed them the data. And it goes back to, Susan, your point around trust. What we found was the ads themselves were resonating incredibly well with women, and particularly younger women, as they were entering into the workforce, and that first interactions with credit cards and debit cards are becoming "quote unquote" cardholder, and then society and sort of writ large, which was great. Check. And so we thought, okay, well, we're going to be moving brand equity metrics, and then that will ultimately move share of wallet, share of spend. The thing that they were concerned about was, well, what happens when men see the content, the advertising? They're going to be turned off, and we're going to get calls from clients and the general public basically saying, you don't care about us, you're not thinking about us. And the reality was, through the wonderment, I'm being facetious, of targeting, men would never really sort of see these ads or in large part the ads. But two, it wasn't offensive. We weren't denigrating men. We were just uplifting conversations and topics among women. And the results showed that in a world where, again, in 2017, 2018, though I would argue it still exists today, like a brand can't just be on the sidelines. I'm not saying you got to take a stand for everything. You're going to be judged however you act or not act. What we found was the net positive benefit of moving from an equity standpoint, younger women and women from being indifferent and ignoring our brand to not, e.g. driving preference, which ultimately drives cardholder usage, greatly outweighed any minuscule negative impact that someone had about our advertising. Again, you're not going to make everyone happy 100% of the time, all the time. But it was like, if you take it in the round, you go, the net positive impact outweighs the negative. That's better for our business. We should go do this. So I'm happy to say we not only ran the campaign for a couple of years and saw the strengthening of equity into share of spend and share of wallet, it sparked like a whole female empowerment task force at Visa. We did a bunch of stuff with some clients on the investing space with like Fidelity. And it was just this like wonderful movement. But it all started with, you got to earn the trust through test and validation. But once you do so, and it goes back to Susan, to your case, like, trust us, then get out of the way, because we're doing good things. We're doing good things in business.
Again, that's an absolutely beautiful example. And to even think about some of the men that would have seen it, they would then be sparked to talk and have conversations with their wife, their daughter, their mother, their aunt, their sister, their colleagues. So it's just highlighting something to help that conversation continue.
Yeah. It was one of my proudest moments, because it was not only wonderfully creative and systematic in its approach, and we didn't get to talk about sort of the closed nature of the campaign, but it was like, not prove the doubters wrong, but it was just like, trust the rigor, and we'll give you outsized returns.
I love it. Now, what advice would you give marketers who worry that adopting the scientific method might actually stifle that creativity or the intuition?
I don't want to sound like a dad, which I am, or my dad, but in some respects, we don't have a choice, given where we are in as practitioners, as marketers and advertisers today. The tectonic plates have shifted. That is an expectation up and down the corporate ladder. So it's sort of like, eat your broccoli. It's we just have to manage through it. Again, I go back to um, this notion that in some respects, constraints unlock creativity, right? A good tight brief, as many creative directors would say, is actually better because it forces a new sort of linear blue flame type of thinking that they may not have employed before. So that's, I think, point number two. Point number three is I don't think that rigor and an approach stifles creativity. It's just where you input creativity into the rigor and into the process. Again, you and I have spoken about build it into the hypotheses, build it into the consideration set of the things that you are testing and validating. Um, Creativity isn't, again, it goes to how you define creativity. Creativity is also in how you analyze the results and what you come up with recommendations and solutions based on those results. That's all creative. It may not be um, it may not be creativity as was previously defined from an artist standpoint, but from a scientific standpoint exists. I think there's a tremendous amount of creativity involved in the process. It's just you got to think about it a little bit more like this curious scientist than um, Jackson Pollock.
Mhm. I love that. And I think that's part of people having to get over that fear is change is inevitable.
Yes.
So you've got to jump on board, and why not use a little bit of data behind it, a little bit of creativity, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then you'll build something magical with it.
Yes. 100%.
Now, I have my final question I love to ask everybody.
Yes.
My final question is, what brand, any brand in the world, best represents you and why?
I I, I love that question. Um, I'm going to say Guinness.
Ooh.
And the why is going back to this notion of a memory or association that you create with a brand. I view Guinness as a brand of intimacy and connection and conversation and something to be enjoyed.
Mhm.
It is anti-trend. It sort of knows who it is and revels in its DNA. Um, there's a level of consistency and joy just from drinking it, but in the process of it. Lastly, I go back to it is a memory just seeing a Guinness or drinking a Guinness of all of the fun, intimate, like crazy moments that I have gotten to spend with my friends in Dublin and in Queens, New York, who I would play soccer and Gaelic football with. So it will forever be that wonderful association. So the brand that I associate most with me is Guinness. Not that I'm a massive Guinness drinker, but like those are all the things that make for, in essence, sort of a wonderful life.
I love that. I love how you've thought through it to bring back those memories of joy and then continually to add more memories with more Guinness over time as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, I'm just going to do a very quick wrap up and then you can add anything final that I may have missed.
Okay.
So, today we we're talking about how marketers really need to start looking at things a little bit differently. Instead of just focusing on being creative and trying to get that winning campaign on those winning awards, but looking more at the scientific approach, which is where a blend of creativity and also a scientific approach to things, you can be your own mad scientist. You can actually take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, a bit from under the counter, wherever you want, even under your shoe if you choose to, and build something magical together that will have creativity with it, but also some rigor with data behind it as well, which is how we can then get success. So, going about this scientific approach is why is it good? You've got steps and processes. You can do hypotheses, test, validate, analyze it, look at the results. Then you can pivot. And the pivot can actually go back into the hypotheses and bring the creativity with it when you're doing that next hypothesis. So it continues not just the scientific part, but the creativity part with it. And that's the best thing about this. Both the scientific side and the creativity side are both curious. They're curious for results, curious for what will work, curious for the next iteration. So they actually blend perfectly, and there'll be a really nice Venn diagram in there too. Now, the great thing about the scientific approach is you can then have more confidence. You can educate people. Is a decision here that's actually based on some data, not necessarily certainty, but definitely a lot better for um, what I'd say would be predicting that
Mhm.
how it would work in the future when it comes to, like, we know the risk factors when we're talking with finance. When they're investing, there's a risk profile. The same thing with marketing. There is no certainty with marketing spend that you're going to get that return. It is a risk. So by doing this scientific approach, you're adding that rigor in there for people to understand where the numbers are coming from and what may or may not happen. But it's based on confident decisions from education, from looking and aligning other outcomes to those decisions. And it's always in that search of truth, because that's where it's all aligning, because you want to create meaningful memories to drive behaviors and associations with your marketing. So this is where using the two approaches together makes it more powerful, and having more experimentation makes it magical. Now, AI is a great tool. However, it's great for things like going a bit faster, optimization, maybe testing, automation, maybe spitting out some extra types of content based on your original content as well. But AI isn't something everyone trusts yet. It's only as good as the data that goes in. And eventually the data will get a bit, what can we use for a better word, bland, in the sense that all the data will start to look similar. And this is where you have to think about AI is it can't think like a human. You have to train it, but the human brain is so complicated. So that's where humans are still very much needed throughout this process. AI is a great tool to help you get there, but humans need to be involved in it. Now, marketers with the C-suite, when you're doing this new approach, you first off need to start with a new slate. Be truthful. Talk about how some reporting might not be sufficient to be able to tell them what they need to know for decisions. Start talking the language of the business, particularly those of the CFO, because getting them on board is huge. Ensure they know what can or cannot be proven, and that everything is actually always going to be based on hypotheses. And then we're going to be looking for probabilities. Set that level. Create a new framework where you can, that is based on probabilities and on past campaigns, so that you can bring more rigor to it. Tell them about the risk so that they understand it, but align on all of this with the C-suite so they understand it. Educate them, bring them on the process, tie it into the corporate strategy. These will be the winning formulas to get them on board, to build that trust with the marketing team. But again, rigor. Rigor is the biggest thing here. Build it into the briefs, build it into your hypotheses. Creativity will come. It's not going to be stifled. It will still come. Even if you've got the tightest brief possible, that's when new ideas might be sparked from it. So don't be scared. The scientific process will help with creativity. They blend together. Remember, Venn diagram. We love them. But ultimately, scientists are curious. Marketers are curious. This is a perfect blend of both. Terry, anything I've missed or you'd like to add further, please share.
I go back to the beginning. You do such an amazing job summarizing our conversation. Just like wonderfully spot on. Your point is, just to put a finer point on your summary. If science is the search for truth, so too is marketing, and that truth, e.g., in the eye of the beholder, uh, is better arrived at through rigor and a scientific approach, because it gives us a higher probability of that. That said, to your point about AI, um, humans by nature make emotionally based decisions, and whilst AI can try and predict what we do, they cannot feel like we feel, and therefore
we will always sort of have a seat at the table. And by the way, that's how we should use AI, which is as the support system and the tools by which we get to faster, better, automated, cheaper, um, probabilistic outcomes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for adding that. Now, please, can you tell everyone how they can find you?
I am on LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time writing and listening to podcasts and reading sort of the preeminent thinkers of the day. So yeah, LinkedIn is the best place to find me.
And what is your handle on LinkedIn so everyone knows
I
that?
knew you were going to ask, and unfortunately, I don't have the like. Um, it's not like at Terry Seitz. There's like some
Oh,
numbers.
yes. We have some random numbers. We have
We
a
have some.
57AA654. I will make sure this is all in the notes so everyone can find you really quick. But any final things you'd like to say before we jump off?
No, I want to again thank you for the opportunity to share my story and my point of view. You have been wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time and talking about the mad science approach. I have loved it. For everyone else, don't forget to follow More to Marketing for more future fabulous guests. More to Marketing.